basically, it was when we originally looked at doing this resilience in the planning the water industry. We we had a way of approaching it, but then when it was decided to try and make it a bit more general and open to people to record it, what I've done is I've taken more of an overview to it, and a lot of it's actually common to non-water industry sort of application and contractor application as well. So I hope you find it some use. There's plenty of discussion points in. So the first thing that's worth asking is, what does resilience mean to you? And if we had any volunteers that want to drop something in the chat, see what they thought it meant, or if somebody wants to sort of say, give their thought on what resilience means to them, as we look at this beautiful picture of the Sir David Attenborough. I will remind you it is a recorded session, so just that wee flag. But does resilience have any resonance or meaning to anybody on the call? And would you like to suggest what you think resilience means to you? And if not, we'll just bash on. Okay, everybody stay in mute. Rick, is there anything coming through in the chat about people's thoughts on resilience, sir? No, okay, no worries. Well, sometimes you can think of it being like a mighty oak, and sometimes and it's standing up and it'll take a heck of a pummeling, and sometimes it's maybe like marram grass. Marram grass is a wonderfully subtle thing with its very, very robust rhizome structure, and it can spread everywhere, and it will take everything the weather can throw at it. And marram grass will survive storms that will fell an oak tree. But the OECD definition is about resilience being the act of rebounding and springing back. Scottish Government, who are the owners of Scottish Water, and in their document and guidance in preparing Scotland, describe it as a culture of preparedness in which individuals, communities and organisations take responsibility to prepare for and respond to and recover from emergencies. And much of the planning that Scottish Water does is in guidance and cognizance of the directions that Scottish Water gives ourselves and the other multi-agency partners we work with in Scotland as part of a wider public sort of approach. And it goes back quite a while in terms of community analysis and in-depth sort of working together. Now, in Scotland, we have what's called resilience partnerships. In England, it's resilience fora or forums. And in the last sort of 6-12 months in the back of the pandemic, and I think it's Oliver, and I've forgotten his second name, the Cabinet Minister, who's now the Minister for Resilience. And the UK government is now delivering a new strategic approach to resilience with a developed and shared understanding of civil contingencies and prevention rather than cure as a focus. Greater emphasis on preparation and that prevention aspect, and then resilience as a whole of society endeavour. And that very much matches what's in preparing for Scotland in some ways, and some of the previous cabinet guidance that had perhaps fallen by the wayside for a wee while. And it's worth bearing that in mind because that applies to everybody, not just the water industry. And I've given our colleague Barbara on the call a number of hyperlinks that she'll drop in and you can follow up later. And that include links to these sort of guidance documents and things. The definitions used in the water industry vary a little in phraseology and meaning. And that's partly because some of us are not-for-profit models, some of us are fully private models, and some like one or two like Scottish Water in Northern Ireland are fully public models answerable to their devolved governments. So that drives a different operating model and environment, and that actually impacts the expectations on planning and how you respond to resilience events. But in general, everyone focuses on the management of the risks to the organisation's key services, as you'd expect, through preventative and mitigative actions. And we know that because we all meet regularly in all aspects across the water industry: risk management professionals, resilience and security professionals, along with other operational and IT colleagues, and share and work together to work out what's best for our organisation based on the learning from others. But one definition I'd share with you, and I don't know if you're aware of the UK Water Partnership, but it defines resilience as compromising the ability to cope with and recover from shock, stresses and disruption, uncertainty, thereby maintaining essential services and protecting the environment now and into the future. And a number of organisations within the water, sort of the wider water organisation, sort of groupings in the UK, are members of the UK Water Partnership and looking to see what we can do in terms of supporting climate change and supporting other countries improve and think about how they can with the limited resources that they have, or to by tapping into other resources, improve their resilience. And that's through things like helping and sharing learning, working together on best opportunities to share best practice and things like that. So one that's worth a look at, and that's the UK Water Partnership. Now, does water resilience planning mean anything to you? Does resilience planning mean anything to you? Because it should. Because as a person, as an individual, we've got an important need to understand where we are in resilience terms. We all have resilience planning at the back of our mind, even though we don't think about it. It's simply things like, I've got a trip coming. Have I got enough fuel in the car? What happens if I have to make a detour? It's, do I have enough in the fridge, in the cupboard? Do I have enough food? Things like that. Now, some of us take it a little bit further, but it's worth thinking about that resilience message, and it's something that the water industry is working on in a large scale across all of the water companies that I'm aware of, where we're trying to support our staff in becoming more resilient. And that's not just about having enough kit and enough materials, resources to cope if the power goes out for a day or two, or being able to get to work during that period to help maintain the critical services that we provide. But it's also thinking about their mental well-being, the resilience physically and things like that, because it's all part of that same resilience message. And it's really important because we need people to come to work 100% focused, and that means we need them to be able to cope with the shocks and the stresses that might come from unplanned events. And one of the things that comes through in Ready Scotland, the Preparing for Emergencies document, as part of Preparing Scotland, is the need for us as individuals to think about it. It's about staying informed, what our role is, having an emergency plan in our house, having an emergency kit so we can access critical documents, medication, if we've got children that are on particular drugs, or an elderly relative that stays with us, where we can get support skills and business continuity planning at a local level for ourselves. And that, again, that links there, but it's important that we think about this holistic approach, because emergency planning, resilience planning, business continuity planning in the water industry, or any other business or industrial group, will only work if we can get our staff to work and we can support our staff staying at work. And there's a couple of things to think about there. A lot of you will have moved over to things like VoIP. So you've probably got your Sky system, or you've got your BT system, or you've maybe got your Virgin system, and you'll be on a modem. But if you've moved over to cable, your landline won't work in an emergency, and your phone will go down pretty quickly. It might go down within a matter of minutes, might stay up for half an hour. And it's worth thinking about that and what you might be able to do to make yourself more resilient, or what you need to do to be able to make yourself available so that your organization can talk to you. For example, I've got a UPS that will last me about 8 hours, and I can recharge it in the car while I put the spare in. And a lot of this was known, but wasn't widely talked about until we had Storm Arwen about 2 years ago, this coming month. And what that identified was a lot of people couldn't even phone for an ambulance if they had a medical emergency. Now, there was a lot of discussion around how we got into that position. I'm not here to talk about that tonight, but there is ongoing discussion that hasn't resolved that situation in terms of how we make sure that the British public are as well prepared as some of our European neighbours and colleagues, so that they can call an ambulance 12 hours into a national power outage, for example. So it's things like that are worth thinking about. Another example of that is just thinking about food or fuel in terms of your own personal resilience, but your ability to support your organisation. It's certainly something that is a big focus for a number of the water companies, as well as local authorities and other responders within the Scottish community of practitioners. And that's things like your average garage, and there are a lot less garages, over 40% less than there were 15, 16 years ago, based on the last set of figures I've seen. They only buy fuel on the spot, on they just about need it. So what they do is they buy enough fuel to keep them going for their average demand over 4 or 5 days. And the average person doesn't top their car up until they need to. And usually it gets down to about a quarter. What happens during a fuel scare or any other potential theoretical run on Facebook and all the other social media accounts is everybody panics, runs out to the nearest garage and fills the car up. So all the fuel's now sitting in about 20% of the population's cars, but it takes about a week or two for the system to recover, because it's only designed to deliver the fuel levels that it's used to. So that's worth thinking about also if your organisation is dependent on forecourts, as many of the water companies are, as many of the ambulance services are, and even some of the police services. One to think about. So that's on fuel. And the third one's on food. And it's something that the water industry, along with the power industries, utilities, specifically gas and electricity, are looking at specifically in our planning. And that is if we've got colleagues at work, how do we keep them fed? How do we keep them watered, for example, if there's a national power outage or a severe weather event? But it also applies at home because a lot of people, houses have got smaller, budgets are stretched. A lot of people don't have a big shop. Now, if you're as old as I am, and you were brought up with parents that went through the war, you probably got a couple of weeks. And if you're involved in scouting like I am, you probably got a couple of gas cookers and enough gas to keep you and the neighbours going for a week. But most people don't have that. And it's worth thinking about in your own personal planning, also that for your staff and colleagues. How do we keep ourselves fed? How do we feed colleagues when they come to work? How do we support people staying warm? So that's 3 examples of how you prepare personally, but they'll also apply at the water industry and the other utilities and every other business in the country, and it's currently being looked at and thought about. Now, your courage, your cheerfulness, your resolution will bring us victory was a very famous poster during World War II. And unlike the Don't Panic poster, it was actually used. And the strategies on how we deal with it can be resilience can be traced back to written history and the depths of written history. And they include things like planning for bad harvests, sieges you might have a siege, or you're thinking about you might get put under siege. So you lay up grain, dried salts and foods, a bit like us talking about how much food you keep in the cupboard. It might be isolated or restricted movement during the pandemics. That isn't new. Isolation islands, pandemic islands, disease islands were very common. Both in the UK and in mainland Europe, something we've seen just recently. It might be how you manage or counter an invading force, but that was historical, but it's always been there. We've always needed to prepare for bad events. Modern resilience planning evolved out the challenges of the second and subsequent Cold Wars, and a lot of the planning that's used in the water industry, who originally came from local authority bases, both in Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland more recently. We adopted a lot of that. We've lost some of it. Some of it went by the way. At the end of the end of the last century, the 20th century, and the fall of the Berlin Wall and the wider Iron Curtain, the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a huge, what you could call peace dividend and a reduction in investment, resources and planning. Now that's still feeding its way out. And there's a huge understanding of the challenges that we face in the early 21st century and into the middle of the century, both from ranging from political instabilities, everything that brings, fiscal, economic, pandemic, all the way through climate change. And that's seen an increased agreement and the need for better planning. But the challenge at a corporate level and the challenge at a national and sort of international level is, yeah, we've got that perceived need, we understand it, we need to be more resilient. How do we manage that? An example of a secondary risk that we in Scotland are facing, if you're a company or a business or a householder, is to meet its needs, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service is going through a rationalisation. We get a lot less fires. My brother's a watch manager in the brigade. He spends most of his time cutting people out of cars. Houses rarely burn down now. They're better built. A lot of people don't smoke. That's good if you're in business. A lot of people, companies ban smoking. One of the reasons for banning smoking was it actually saved you in your insurance and reduced your risks. It avoided you having to invoke a BC plan because somebody did a fire. But the challenges there are response times go up. And it's all these sort of changes and challenges that are feeding their way through about what we may or may not need as we go into a time of climate uncertainty, greater risks of flooding, impacts of high winds, all that sort of thing, as well as all the other challenges we've got. And planning needs to include that. And the concepts and philosophy of emergency planning that we got from the original civil contingencies planning of the Cold War era I grew up with, they've been augmented by a wider role for various schools of, and by various schools, I mean various schools of thought within risk management, and then later the sort of business continuity world. And that can lead you, as these lovely silos at our works that's managed by Thames for us at Seafield show, in a kind of silo mentality. And they've also evolved different terminologies and approaches and thought, in part as business opportunities have needed have driven the need to differentiate, specifically perhaps in the consultancy world, perhaps in the business world where you just try to sell a new product. Now that can be a controversial view for some, but there is a push back to ensure an integrated non-silo approach with a common language being seen as critical. And ourselves and a number of the water companies are looking at that, and I'm aware of that for talking to colleagues and partners in some of the other companies, that it's how do we get that integration back that we lost, because we've got business continuity as a specialism, we've got emergency planning, we've got risk in its proper place, which is above that, because really resilience planning, proper integrated resilience planning, is simply a subset of risk. It's how the business manages its risk. Has anybody got any experiences of those schools of thoughts, or anything they'd like to share with us at this point? Or anything you'd like to drop in the chat, and perhaps Rick and Joe and Oliver could pick up along with Barbara? Just any thoughts? I know we're finding it a significant, we're doing a lot of work in this area as a business, and I know that colleagues in the, a number of the other utilities are, not just the water side. Anything, Rick, or are we okay? They're all having their tea. They're all listening, but they're having their tea. That's what it is. Don't want to speak while they're eating.
Your answers for what resilience was, but nothing on this last question.
No worries. Hope you like the pictures, guys. So best practice integrated resilience planning is part of that wider risk management strategy a company takes as it looks to achieve its corporate missions and its strategy, maintaining regulatory compliance, etc. So delivering everything within the regulatory, and that includes fiscal markets that we in Scotland or within England and Wales operate to. And it's critical those are balanced. And there is a difference in political perspective here that comes out. We report directly to our owners, the Scottish Government, as a public company, and we are answerable to the people of Scotland. If you work for Thames, where I've got colleagues, you're answerable to your shareholders and your customers. And that changes the view and the strategy. But it does cut across, if you're doing it properly, a number of interlinked areas that include a focus on both prevention through effective asset planning and effective asset management and the utilisation of that. And that includes training, i.e. prevent. And I'm not going to comment on today's BBC and Guardian and I think it was the Times headlines. And it also looks at your mitigation and recovery planning. So it might be you don't have the money to control a risk to an adequate level as you're going through that treat sort of process for a risk, or a removal process and elimination. You decide you don't need it. So you need to improve your mitigation and recovery planning. But there's a limit to what you can do around that in the water industry. And we'll talk about that in about 5 minutes. But you also, as part of that planning, need a good understanding of the internal and external threats to the company achieving its objectives. And some of these, they've always been the same for the water industry, and they always will be. We collect raw water, we process it, we treat it, we distribute it, we collect through the drainage catchments, wastewaters, we treat those, we discharge them to the environment. They're open to a lot of the same challenges, though some of those challenges are increasing. The impacts of climate change, elephant in the room to be blunt, the age of the assets, another, the willingness of people to pay and what they're willing to pay are also a third. There are others. So it's understanding that and then being able to tie your plans to that as part of your risk management process. It's really important as we understand the environment that we work in, that we remember that the water industry provides critical national services. And as such, its assets and operations are considered critical to both UK PLC's safety. We drink it. We all make a food product. Everybody consumes it. From the moment you get up, you clean your teeth after you've had your breakfast. And when you had your breakfast, you probably boiled the kettle. Now that'll help for some things. It won't help for others. You made your coffee and everything else. You maybe had a shower before that, and so forth and so on. That significantly influences the owner and the regulator focus on how water companies plan, prepare and train and exercise their own resilience plans, and those they share with the multi-agency partners that they work with, because it's a multi-agency environment we all operate in. And it also stresses around the importance of protecting those plans. Now that limits a bit what we can talk about today, because a lot of these plans are actually classified at a certain level of restriction. Some of the multi-agency plans we're operating at, the water industry operate within, have to go through, only certain staff can access them. Only certain staff are able to input to them, either internally or as part of the external process. One of the big things that came out of, if you remember, the Salisbury poisonings for the water company down there, was they didn't actually have anybody that was adequately security cleared to access the meetings to identify what the risk to their wastewater and treatment and network staff were. Now, that was a huge challenge. There's a lot of work being done in that space, but there's still a bit to go. But that can have impacts on how we think about those plans. But it's really important. And that takes you into the cyber risk, because these plans are a target. And we have to be open and honest there. There are people out there that will do it for money, and there are a lot of people out there that will do it for political or other reasons. And amongst the principal legislation that supports resilience in the UK are the Civil and Contingency Acts as amended. And those define the water companies as category 2 responders. And for those that aren't aware what that means, there's 2 categories of responder. Category 1, that's things like fire, ambulance, police, NHS, local authorities. And they have statutory duties and responsibilities. And then you have category 2, who have lesser duties and responsibilities. All utilities, including water companies, are category 2 responders under the Acts. And I say Acts because there's one for Scotland, there's one for England and Wales, etc. And they're in the link if you want to go find more if you're not cited in those. Now, on the back of those Acts, the governments in UK level for England and Wales and in Scotland issue directions. And those directions tell us as operators what additional contingency measures we have to take. That might be an investment in specific security measures. It might be in specific planning. The big thing that's been looked in there with the support of the regulators, specifically in England and Wales at the moment, is how much bottled water and contingencies you store. And one of the things that came out of recent events last year was that a number of the companies in England, and some of you on the call, I'm sure, will be from these and will be aware of this, they used the same suppliers for emergencies. Unfortunately, when they all went to those suppliers, they couldn't supply them all at the same time. So that might be in the supply of tankers. So when there was a water shortage, you need tankers to help augment your supply. Though it's limited, if you've got 1 million people, you're not going to get very far with a few dozen tankers. Or bottled water. If you've got a population of about 15,000, and I can't go into the details for obvious reasons what we're geared up for, but 15,000 people would be a significant amount of people to put bottled water out to. And the regulations requires them to get a number of litres for the first 24, 48 hours and a significant number after that. Now, that's a huge ask. One or two of our utility colleagues down south were basically going over to the continent because there isn't that much bottled water in certain parts of the UK, and it was very difficult to get it there. So it's things like that that are currently being looked at, for example, by the English and Wales regulator, who's looking for a worst case now as opposed to a reasonable case. As opposed to you come back with what you think you know is a reasonable case to come back for. The regulators now asking for utilities to say, right, we need you to demonstrate that you are geared up to a more reasonable worst case scenario. And that's a heck of a lot of bottled water and a heck of a lot of tankering, if it's, for example, on the water side. So, and that comes through direction, as I say, in regulation. It's a big focus, but the key has to be on, remember what's up, loose lips sink ships. Now, I'll give you a look at our assets. We're the third biggest water company. We cover a huge area compared to any other water company. We have a very distributed population. We have quite a bit in the central belt and up the east coast, but we cover over a third of the landmass of Scotland, and by the time you take all the islands into account, it's a heck of a lot. We have more treatment works. We have probably the second most number of length of pipes, if not. We certainly have by far and away the most number of wastewater treatment works. And that's a huge amount of assets to deal with, and it's worth thinking about, and this applies to all the water companies. And it's a salient point that's come out lately around the need to look at better mitigation and reaction within our resilience planning to severe weather events that impact wastewater discharges. And to work with our customer base to remember the only 3 things you stick down the toilet are pee, poo, and paper. not oils, greases, fats, nappies, wet wipes, and everything else. What happens is they go down the network and they settle out. You can see my hands going over, and they settle out and they sit there. And then we get a severe weather event and they all compact up. And the last severe weather event we had, it was a week and a half to get over it, and we had 3.5, 4 times the number of chokes we get in a normal week in 3 days. So we had 7 days work in 3 days times 4, almost 4. And that's just through poor customer behavior. Nothing to do with the assets. They do what they're designed to do, but just from that. And that can cause pollution events. It can cause internal sewer flooding. It can cause external sewer flooding. So there's all these things to think about when you're looking at that. And the other thing to think about is the age of the assets. In the water industry, we're dealing with assets that go back to the Victorian period, and it varies from utility to utility, but the vast majority of the utility holdings across the country were built pre-1950. And almost everything was built pre-1990. So that means our average asset in terms of networks, sewers, many of the water, almost all the water treatment works, the reservoirs, the dams, the raw water distribution systems are at the best, if you're lucky, 40 to 50, many of them 70, 80, 100 years old. So it's worth thinking of the investment that went in Victorian, Edwardian, and post-war. There are discussions within the industry about how well they did with the limited resources to do some of the stuff they did post-war, late 40s into the 50s, when the economy wasn't in a good place. And the fact it's lasted is perhaps brilliant, but now we're having to look at it. Some of that, including cost cornering, means that we're affected across the industry, for example, by the RAC issue. And there's a huge amount ongoing in the water industry across all the utilities to look at that at the moment, again, as part of a resilience response. So that's us. Now, what does that mean? We could have disruption to our water collection. How available and easy is it to get prolonged dry periods, aquifer deterioration, impacts from fuel spills, dry and wet deposition from wildfires is a growing impact for many water companies. And that's partly a result of severe weather. The windows, you had a couple of windows for wildfires. If you're not sighted on that sort of stuff, the season's massively extended now. We're starting to see longer dry periods, and in the winter, just because it's cold doesn't mean it won't catch fire. It just needs a cigarette butt in the wrong place, a vape incorrectly disposed of when it's still heating, or some other accident. It could simply be a glass bottle. A glass bottle can cause dry brush to catch fire, ignite and catch fire on a winter's day. If it's a bit of broken glass that's sitting there and the sun's strong enough, it'll still do it. In the summer, you're well away. Things like that, or accidental releases. So that wet and dry deposition are challenges that we're seeing across the piece. They also cause the water industry a lot of other challenges that we're looking at and planning around. For example, once you've had a brush fire, a wildfire as we call them in Scotland, you've got bare ground. If you then get a heavy precipitation period, where they're looking at a lot of deposition washing in to the reservoir, and that could see us having loadings of crypto and other parasites, as well as turbidity issues, and that feeds into your treatment processes and things like that. Potential impacts on water quality and the production of the water. It could be bursts, third-party strikes, and illegal connections. Now, illegal connections have always been a challenge in the water industry, but they are growing again. And Barbara will drop you something in that happened just before Scottish Water, east of Scotland, the precursor of Scottish Water formed, a place called King's Kettle. And basically an entire village got poisoned because a local farm that diversified into preparing food. You're talking over 300 households. I think the paper said 300 people. It was over 300 households. Simply because they connected up a wastewater connection. These things are potential risks. They are things we plan for. Third-party strikes are very common now, and they're actually more common than they used to be, partly because of the lack of focus by many of the contractors, the subcontracting, and the cutting of corners. That's a water industry opinion, of course. Others may have a different opinion. Wastewater network is seeing, as I said, a lot more sewer chokes than we used to see. The assets are aging. We're seeing a lot of bursts. We're seeing a lot of flooding. Remember, a sewer's only designed to cope with so much. It'll be designed for 4, 6, 8 times dry weather flow if you're lucky. 6 is more common. And what that means is the sewer is designed to clean itself. And that's where you get into a lot of these CSO impacts. They're not designed to take Mediterranean type high intensity rains that we're now getting in very short periods in small areas. So the planning within the industry to look at how it copes with this, how it clears chokes, how it deals more quickly with bursts, how it deals with surcharges, CSO surcharges, including those that are licensed, is increasing. It's more of a focus for some of the companies than it is for others. But it's an area of a large amount of planning is going on in the industry. Then you're into the actual treatment process where you're treating in the effluent quality. So these are all impacts that we can have and we plan for. And one of the big ones there I've got is illegal discharges by companies. There isn't a month goes by somewhere in Scotland, for example, we don't have somebody that chucks someone down the sewer that they shouldn't have, or has a spill in their factory and forgets to tell us, and we lose an entire treatment process because they put a biocide down, or they've lost, a couple of thousand litres of fuel oil or something like that. So all these sort of things are the sort of things that can happen and that the industry plans for. But the impacts are what counts, and how we mitigate those impacts to our customers are critical. The first is loss of supply, and you'll have seen that demonstrated in the responses that are being learned from by a number of the utilities in terms of what do we do when the supply is too great. We can't produce enough. And that leads to what can we do short term and what can we do long term in terms of changing our asset setup. When you build a water treatment works, you build it so it goes like that, flat line, and you've got enough to ramp up. But from an economic point of view, to make sure that you minimize the cost to your customer, you don't build it with the expectation you can triple or quadruple supply at short notice. What you do is you build storage into the system in something called service reservoirs. What you do is use them to peak lop it. And what we're seeing in some areas of the country now, and what we're having to respond to as an industry through tankering, through building, for example, a couple of utilities are now building additional reservoirs as housing densities increases and use increases. And use is a big issue here, and misuse as well. It's how we can improve that loss of supply and how we can help people sort of manage that and manage their water usage. Because water might fall from the sky, but it falls more infrequently than we're used to, and it costs money to treat. Now, from a Scottish perspective as a public body, what we look at is the less we have to treat and the less we waste, and we work very hard on our leakage. Our figures are in the annual report. There's an economic level for leakage and what you can focus on that we discuss through, for example, our customer council and our regulators and our other stakeholders. But there's a limit to what you can get, and then it comes back to, do you need to wash your car every week? When it's lovely weather for 9 weeks, do you need to fill the paddling pool and use a family of four's water for 2 days and pour it out every night? Things like that we need to think of as a country. If you look at the water level usage in a number of European countries, and Scotland is higher on average than the average English and Welsh user, but we're all much higher than many of our continental cousins. And it's thinking about that, because that also feeds into the environmental challenges we're all facing of how we reduce energy consumption and pollution. It could be water quality impacts, discoloration, aesthetics, the need to boil water, issue warnings. For example, you can't drink it, but you could cook with it. These all have challenges, and the industry plans to deal with those quite effectively. We all have banks of notices and lettering ready to go out to customers to update and advise them what they need to do. But we try wherever possible not to issue, for example, a boil notice, which might be issued, for example, if there was a cryptosporidium parasite outbreak, as you probably saw a couple of years ago in one of the north of England utilities. And the reason for that is boiling water costs money. And for poor people, that's a challenge. And for people in an economic crisis that are maybe using a meter with a card, that's an even bigger challenge. So there's things like that that we look at and we plan for. We'll look at the risks of flooding and damage to properties and how we respond to those with our multi-agency partners. It isn't just simply a matter of how do we decamp people to hotel. What we have to do is liaise very effectively, and I know a couple of our colleagues in the north of England are also very good at this, is because you might have a family that's elderly. It might be somebody being treated for terminal disease, cancer, for example. It might be a child with a disability. It might be an elderly couple where one is fine but looking after their partner that's got dementia, and you're having to bring in, for example, community support around that and talking to your local authority colleagues and looking at how we can best support those. So the industry plans for that, and it works in exercises to look at that and make sure that customers with additional support needs are looked after. All the utilities make a big push on trying to get what we call priority service register customers. In Scotland, we work in partnership through the Scottish Government with other utilities to get people to register so that we know that there are elderly people there, that we know that there are people there with challenges. And one of the proactive things we've done in Scotland, and I know that other utilities in England are looking at this, is we start putting out bottled water to our PSR customers. We don't force it on them. We send them a card and say, would you like some bottled water? And what we do is we take out 2 packs of bottled water. So if we have an interruption to supply, we don't have to worry. We know they can take their medicine. We know that the health visitor's got access to water for a period. And that means that we can iron out any local difficulties. And if it goes on to a longer period, we can then return support and focus them by taking out more water. Wastewater is a big one, a lot about flooding and damage. And I can't comment on the English position in CSOs beyond that. The experience I have from talking to colleagues and mates from uni that work down there is they have the same issues that we have up here. And a lot of it isn't down to poor asset management, though there is obviously what's out there in terms of what the investigations that are being incurred by the regulators. A lot of it's down to customer misuse of the system. So I would stress poo and paper. And there's a big decision having to be made and taken, and discussions ongoing about where we take the infrastructure and the assets, how that will be invested and spent going forward to deal with the challenges of climate change. And that takes you back to resilience isn't just about having a plan for something going wrong, it's how we prevent that thing going wrong. And then you've got your environmental pollution risks, how we clear up, how we mitigate, and then your odor issues as well. And those can be big issues. And one of the big things for wastewater that has come out of the pandemic is a lot more people have appreciated how valuable their environment in the UK is. They get out a lot more. And they've started doing a lot of good things, walking, wild swimming, going to the local park, visiting their local rivers, getting into bird watching and stuff. That means they're spotting a lot of things that maybe were going on that shouldn't, or that best practice wasn't being applied. And it's something that the industry is aware of. And I can only comment in Scottish Water. We work hand in glove with our regulators and with our customer council, etc., and with our customers in general. And we're looking at what our customers feel we need to do around our planning and adjusting our resilience planning to suit. There's wider societal impacts, though, you get. We talked about disruption to vulnerable customers, but it's also the impact on how they're being cared for in the community. The impacts in schools, hospitals, care homes and prisons. If the police service have got to deploy 120 people to support a prison that's no water, because no water in a prison is a huge risk, or in a hospital, you've got a huge risk, or in schools where you're having to send all the kids home and it's impacting on everybody's ability to go to work. Many of the utilities have very specific planning on how they'll manage that. It's complicated a little by the way that water industry works in the UK. We all sell water or provide water to our customers, and our customers are the domestic base. There are then license providers, many of them owned by water utilities, who then sell water, which they buy at rates agreed and set with the regulators from the water producers, the water companies, to private businesses or to care homes, schools, hospitals, local authorities, and everything. In Scotland, we work with our licence provider with the agreement of the Scottish Government to create plans so that we can support hospitals, prisons, care homes, etc. And we regularly test those to make sure that we are supporting them. There can be impacts in industry and business, impacts in recreational activity and tourism, and we need to plan as multi-agency partners to how we deal with those. And one to think about is that all businesses need to have a business continuity plan. And every time we have an outage, we've had a few and over the years, we will have businesses come and say to us, but we didn't have any backup. You know, you let us down, and we go, well, we're really sorry, but what were your continuity plans for that event? Because it is a reasonable, forecastable event. And it's something Scottish Government, through Protecting Scotland, certainly pushes companies to do. And Fire and Rescue Service up here, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, have quite stringent contingency plans. which we work with and we notify them of so that they know that they will not be able to get water in areas when they're out, and I know other utilities do the same. There's impacts in agriculture, food preparation, etc., and environmental impacts. And those wider societal impacts mean that water companies' resilience plans, remember in the categories Cat 1, 2 and the Civil Contingencies Act, are required to rapidly escalate the likelihood of such impacts, i.e. it might happen, but it's not happened yet, but we're giving you a heads up, or it's happened and here's where it could go, to all our key stakeholders, so that the consideration of the need for any multi-agency response to such impacts can be introduced. In Scotland, the guidance I'm talking about is Preparing Scotland. It has a set of philosophies, principles, structures and regulatory duties. It basically works on the hub model, and it's quite effective. It's needing a bit of work. Everybody's working hard in the background on it. We updated the STAC guidance in October 22, all the partners, including Scottish Water, feeding into that. And it's a set of guidances that we work through. My understanding is that that's what the UK Resilience sort of directorate under the Cabinet Officer, Cabinet Minister appointed, are looking to do, which I sort of repeat and invigorate, because the Cabinet Office did actually have a lot of this in very good vigour and order. Kind of petered out, as I said, maybe a little after the Cold War. When you look at your planning, and this is from our annual report, publicly available guides in there for you. It's the sort of things that you're looking at as a business, your emerging risk radar, and where you're thinking they're going, the timescales, the velocity they're going to hit us at, whether it's an opportunity and a threat, an opportunity or a threat. And we link into this in terms of where we think our resilience planning needs to be. For obvious reasons, and some of you will be in the same position I am, it's not something you talk out of school on, but you can see the sort of things that we look at. We look at things around everything from cyber, energy costs is a big one that's been came out the blue for all of us, I suppose. But we also look at things like space weather. Now, what's that? That's stuff that could take out your satellites and your comm systems. And one of the things that we try to look at in our planning is, in risk terms, you've got the here and nows. High impact, high probability. For example, we're all waiting for the next flu pandemic. Could be tomorrow, could be in 12 months, 3 years. What have we learned from the last one that we need to take forward in bed? But you also have your very high impact, low probability events. And within the industry and within each company, it's for them, along with their regulators, to look at how they would decide to interpret that and then justify it to their stakeholders once it occurs. We work with our owners and we look at that with them and in discussion, obviously, in the basis of our customers. There's also something called the National Risk Register, which is based on the UK Security Risk Register, which is a document that isn't made publicly available and has a number of levels. So I'm cited on 1 or 2 of them, but I wouldn't be cited on 3 or 4. I don't need to be. And on the back of that, the Scottish Government looks at that from a Scottish risk assessment perspective. The National Risk Assessment is updated every year, and there's links to that in the guidance I gave to Barbara that she'll share with you. I can't share the Scottish Risk Assessment with you because that has a classification level that isn't for public consumption. But HIP basically looks at where does Scotland sit in terms of those national risks, and perhaps where they're sitting at a moderate level. Do they need to be a little higher for Scotland, given our geography, our climate? Wildfire is a big one for us. We're probably one of the biggest risks within the UK sort of countries, for example, for wildfire. But worth looking at, and if you're not aware of from your own agency or organisation, worth having a look at those and thinking about specifically in the National Risk Register, are we planning for those? And then if you go back to talking to your risk colleagues sitting up there at corporate level, are we engaging with them to make sure that planning is effective? Effective integrated resilience is designed to support that. You want a rapid, timeous way of escalating the disruption of services. Or if a multi-agency partner phones you up to say there's a coma site, it's a risk of going bang. You might have utilities near it that are at risk, things like that. Could take out a major telecoms or power site that you might utilise. Have you got processes in place? We work with them. We work with multi-agency partners to test them, as I know other water utilities do. The normal mode within the utilities, as in general resilience planning, is it goes to the appropriate level of leadership to be dealt with. And that's called the lowest level of subsidiarity. So you deal with it as low down as you can. And then what you do is you activate your plans, you mobilize key personnel and resources, and you look at making sure you're effectively engaged with customers, internal and external stakeholders. That doesn't just mean local authority, Cat 1, Cat 2 type providers. It also means things like in Scotland, local councillors, members of the Scottish Parliament, members of the UK Parliament. How are we impacting and mitigating the impacts on our customers? For example, have we taken bottled water down to the school so they can stay open? Well, we get a tanker out there and then we can tanker to Main so they don't have to shut the primary school. How do we recover key services? Can we put an overlander and pump round the burst in the sewer? You can't really do a lot with tankering in sewers. You're moving hundreds and hundreds of cubic meters, sometimes an hour. There's no way that's doable with, for example, tankering, but there's other things you can do and we plan for that. And where necessary, invocation and support to pertinent multi-agency partners is critical. And that's an example that I'll show you here that we work to, but it's pertinent in England and Wales as well. If we go to multi-agency planning, it will be led by the local police authority. In Scotland, we have a unified police authority, Police Scotland, and they're the experts in command and control. They take all the notes, so they're available for the public inquiry afterwards, and they chair all the meetings. At strategic level, it's usually Assistant Chief Constable or Chief Superintendent minimum. At tactical, it'll be Superintendent or Chief Inspector, and operational will all be off doing their own thing. And that shows our sort of little structure down there. But that's the sort of level we work with. And if it involves a health issue, you'll have a scientific and technical advisory cell, as we call them up here in. And that's how it looks if it's a bigger issue. And you can see how it feeds into our Scottish Government and also to UK Government and COBR. We've got SCOR, Scottish Government Operational Room. They call it COBRA in England. I've never got that because there's no way it's COBR. And it's the Cabinet Office briefing room, as some of you will be aware. But that shows the sort of tactical level. Now, we're heading into some bad weather tomorrow. And into Thursday up here. There's a significant flood risk for some areas, significant high winds in some areas. So the SCOR, Scottish Government Resilience Room, will be set up, and all of the utilities like ourselves and local authority resilience partnerships will be feeding on on a by exception basis. So they'll be talking where it's necessary and where they stand up to make sure that the Scottish Government's got an overview and can support and has the confidence that we're all dealing with it in partnership and working together. Now we'll talk about doctrine. Most organisations don't operate on a command and control basis. They're not the police, they're not the fire. The doctrine we use, and it's used by a number of other utilities, though there has been, as people have left and changed, a review in some of the other water companies on this, but it's a doctrine that supports effective mitigation recovery from potential or actual impacts. It means that we can deliver to our key customers. It enables us to react quickly and efficiently and effectively. It's mission command, but the way we look at it is we are not the military. We've got our own way of working, as do some of the other utilities where I know that they utilise this and we sort of talk about it and stuff. And it's an effective command and control sort of system. It came out of the Prussian military when they were fighting the French and the Franco-Prussian War. Smaller army, beat the biggest army in the world at that point, created a new Germany. But they did it very efficiently because what they did is they understood subsidiarity. They didn't wait for an instruction to go through 9 levels of command. They delegated responsibility and accountability to the lowest level. And that's the way that mission command works. And that's the way it's best to run resilience planning. And that's how we work at it. And it basically works in a mission. You identify what you need to do. You have a commander to lead the mission, and they set and communicate objectives to those that need to do it. And that's called a commander's intent. And they set the subsidiary missions. So depending on the incident, for example, we have a manager or a very senior manager leading the event. They will set the mission. They will agree with our senior leadership team, and that will set all the missions down below. A lot of these are run-of-the-mill, so you can pull stuff off the shelf. You can tweak it as you need it. It's a very common tool that's used not only in the water industry, but elsewhere. It helps you build cohesive teams. It creates shared understanding and trust, but it only works if you practice and train regularly. And that means you get people in rooms, you get them in virtual environments and hybrid environments, and you practice, because it's not how we normally operate. We as an organisation are very collegiate. Mission command is collegiate, but it has got a very firm command and control aspect. At this point, I'd normally ask about people's experiences, but I'm conscious of time. But if there's anything you'd like to share, please do share. We're going to share very quickly a couple of rules that are very important to Mission Command. The first rule of time, and it's if you're in a problem, and it's actually worth using outside, and it's very commonly used in identifying missions and achieving objectives within those the sort of groups that use Mission Command ourselves, the number of the other water companies, and that's never allow a third of the time, more than a third of your time, to understand the situation, the challenge. Allow half your time to formulate, develop, and validate the course of action you're going to take, and then allow yourself a fifth of the time you think you've got to produce and issue the direction and communicate it effectively. What's constantly shown in post-incident debriefs, and it doesn't matter what you're looking at, Ariana Grande bombing, the Piper Alpha debacle, some of the events we've had, we've seen the same thing. Everybody gets into procrastination, analysis paralysis, spends far too much time in trying to understand the problem, not enough time formulating, developing, but more importantly, forget to validate or don't validate effectively the cunning plan, the potential course of action, and then they run out the instructions and wonder why people did the wrong thing. Rule of time, really important, valuable tool. The second one's the response estimate, 7 questions. We utilise it. It's based on a military tool. We've been using it for over 20 years. Well, I was using it long before that, but it's very worth using. It's been around for, it's really a variant on a model that was used during the First World War. Actually, I think the Germans were quicker at it than us. I think it goes back pre-First World War in the German model. Probably got it. And it's basically a version of PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, the deeming cycle. Assess, plan, implement, API. And it fits, if you think about it, to the rule of time, 30, 50, 20. And it basically has 3 sets of questions. What's the impact? What have I been asked to do? What do I want to develop? How do I achieve it? What do I need? Where do the actions take place? What control measures do I need to take? It's just a literal way of doing it and capturing it. It's iterative. You might have to revisit phases. We use sync matrices. Some of our other utility partners used to. I think a lot of people have got out of, and I was talking to a couple of colleagues, no names, no pack drill, and a couple of other utilities who, like me, were moaning that people aren't using them. We need to get people back in the meeting rooms and practice using them. But they're how you work out. They're basically project planners. But at 3 in the morning, they help you see that you can't have the same vehicles turning up at the same gate for different purposes for a recovery and a mitigation plan. And it also is a fantastic way of identifying your KPIs, but it also means that you've also got a fantastic documentary process to actually then show what you're doing to your auditors going through your debrief. And the third tool I'd give you as we finish is learning from exercises, and the real life's critical. The water industry, and I've been in it a long time now, is brilliant at learning, but we struggle with implementing the actions and end up repeating the same mistakes. It can have significant reputational impacts and customer trust issues with your multi-agency partners, your regulator stakeholders. And this applies in general across a lot of organizations. You need to think about debriefs. We have a hot debrief, short, face-to-face, hybrid, virtual, and it's immediate critical learning. And we go for cold debriefs, in-depth reviews post-incident if we need them. The focus isn't hot. We get a lot for the hot, but for really big events where we really need to look at it, we want to prevent these happening. So what do we look at? Hot debriefs, areas of significant concern, focus on health, safety and well-being, keep everybody safe. Any improvements we can make in our operational or other activities. Did the planning work right? Were the countermeasures adequate? Did we roll it out right? Did we find Dave and Fred had forgot their training? We need to increase the frequency of training. Maybe we need an extra exercise in the cycle every year. Were there any other concerns? We try to do these in less than 15 minutes. We try to get everybody out the door in 10 or 15 minutes, capture the points. The commanders within our incident control plan then feed them back. Our team takes them and collates them. Then we share out the commonalities for learning. People can action and we look to what we can action. Cold debriefs are much deeper. You're looking at operational policies plans. They're done in slow time. One I've just finished took about 3.5, 4 months. And we must have had about, 3 sets of questionnaires, a couple of workshops, a lot of looking at it. But it's all about looking at that effectiveness and learning, because that's how you become more resilient. That's how you become more effective and efficient, and you protect your critical services and you prevent sort of challenges and problems. And then it's just open to questions.
Thanks, Mark. That was fantastic. There's a few questions in the chat, so I've just taken them offline and made a copy of those. It's probably best if we pick those up with those individuals, if that's okay. Just conscious of the time.
Yep. No worries at all. So over to you, Rick.
Great. As Joe says, thanks very much, Mark, for that. Very interesting topic. I'm used to seeing Scottish Water and water supply from a slightly different aspect, but thinking about it from the resilience side is equally valuable. So as Joe says, that we've got a few questions. There's a common theme to them of, is there a need for adjustment of the water reliant industries out there to have more thought of their own resilience? A very clever example that was put in there is a farmer who loses their food stock for their livestock doesn't expect someone to turn up with a replacement supply of food for their livestock. Should they are usually resilient and have prepared themselves. Should water be a similar sort of considered in the same kind of way from an industry perspective?
There's an approach that our owners have to this one in Scotland. I couldn't comment on the position in England and Wales, but in Scotland we would look to support where it was possible. But the Scottish government guidance is quite clear to all businesses that they have a duty and responsibility to prepare for such impacts. And if it came down to it, that would be a decision that would be taken at multi-agency level as to what the direction of travel would be. And I think it would vary from incident to incident, area from area. But that would be a collective decision. It would be one that we would be involved in supporting, but not one we would necessarily take in our own right, because there are a lot of implications in the back of that.
Indeed. There's also a few comments about similar just-in-time inventory. One question, I suppose, that's slightly different here. Would Scottish Water consider metering residential water supplies similar to England as a way of, suggestion here is reducing water usage? I suppose managing water usage might be a different phrase to it.
That's for our customers and our owners to express an opinion on. Our job is to serve our customers. What I would say in England is metering hasn't been as successful, from my understanding and from the Upward reports I've seen, in reducing the supply amongst certain socioeconomic portions of the population. Would that be the politically correct way to put it?
Fair enough. I'll just ask one more because I'm conscious of time. We're just gone 7 o'clock, sorry. Nixie Wood suggests, coming out of New Zealand, it seems. You touched on KPIs. Does Scottish Water have any levels of services? What service levels you expect to deliver during an emergency? Here in New Zealand, we're working on national infrastructure resilience and planning.
They're actually the same for England and Wales, and they're actually set in regulation. And it actually states the literage that you must provide, and it's a best endeavours because it will depend on the circumstances. So say it was a major severe weather event, the expectation would be there is understanding that if it's 8 feet of snow, there's a limit to what you can do. But yeah, they're actually set in regulation. You can actually read them on the links I've sent out, and they're actually also referenced in Waters for Scotland.
There we go. So plenty of reading.
Yeah. Are you okay with those, Barbara? There is quite a lot of links there, guys, but I wanted you to get the benefit of it if you would look it up. Was Barbara were you able to drop those, Barbara?
Yeah, there've been links pinging through as you've been talking.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay. So we're 7 minutes over. I mean, obviously,
apologies.
No. There's way more questions and interesting chat. So yes, thank you very much for that, Mark. The recording will obviously go up on YouTube at the end. We've got a number of questions and answers, and I don't know whether the protocol is we can circulate answers with notes afterwards. So I'd just like to say thank you for attending the Resilience Planning in Water Industry webinar, and I'd say thank you for attending generally CIWEM Scottish branch an event. My first one as host, and hopefully a number more to come. I don't know if there's anything more to add at this stage, Barbara.
I'd just like to thank the branch and also to Mark for a really interesting presentation, thought-provoking, especially in the times that we live in, where we're getting more and more challenges to the resilience of our systems and our infrastructure. So it's quite a lot to ponder on there, but really, really excellent presentation, Mark. I can produce a report of all Q&A, which I'll send to you all. But thanks to everybody for attending as well. So